Hi, I'm Michael Hartman.
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo. And this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by the Mo Pros. I am your host, Michael Hartman, joined today by one co-host, Mr. Mike Rizzo.
Hey, I'm the other co-host joining today.
The other
live,
but recorded for those who are listening to it now. Yeah, recorded live in studio. Well, in virtual studio. All right. So joining us today on this episode, we are going to be talking about account-based go-to-market architecture, and that's joining us is Xander Broeffle. Xander is currently Senior Director of Marketing Operations at CS2, a marketing ops, RevOps consultancy. His career and life has provided many experiences ranging from caring for the elderly, taking part in the arts, working with cutting-edge technologies, and collaborating in the business world. Prior to CS2, Xander worked as a director of global marketing operations for Stratasys. He also spent 9 years in a variety of roles at Code 42. So Xander, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
I am too, since I've been in many places where ABM has been something we've talked about, but not actually pulled the trigger on. So I am here to learn just as much as our audience is. But because when I was getting ready for this, I do a little more of a dive into people's background. Let's start with your career journey. And there are things in your background that I discovered along the way, and including your involvement with theater, which is, I think, an interesting one. But would you just give us a brief rundown of a little deeper than what I just did of your career, and as much of that and things outside of sort of the, in quotes, right, traditional professional journey that you think have had influences on kind of what you do now, how you look at things, and where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say, our history defines who we are today, and it's all of those experiences that you have that ultimately brings you to the point where you're at today. And like many of your other guests, I certainly did not grow up thinking I was going to be a marketing ops professional. While I'm glad that I am now in my 30s, that was definitely not the dream, even in college. So you talked about caring for the elderly. That was more my family. So I grew up where my family actually ran a foster home for adults who had disabilities of a variety of types. And so while I was an only child, I was always raised with multiple folks in the home, and had brothers and sisters throughout my time, and still do, which is awesome. And that sort of care and empathy really carried me through my entire life, and I can attribute a lot of just like my personal being to that. But yeah, thinking through, I grew up thinking I was going to be an actor. And then I moved into what is called stage management for live theater. That's what I was kind of doing shortly after college. And stage management is you're keeping track of everything. You are the first one in and the last one out. You are managing, you are taking notes, you're sharing that across with the set designer and the lighting designer and the costume designer, and you're taking care of the actors, and you're doing all of this work. Kind of sounds a lot like marketing ops. where you're kind of keeping everything connected. So there's a lot of the skills that I had just even from the arts, in a different way that really helped to contribute to some of the strengths that I bring to a marketing operations role. So at Code 42, I was a tech guy, started in support, eventually moved my way into IT. When I was in IT, I was a business analyst for our Salesforce team. And so I actually started more on like the sales operations and then marketing side, but I was working as a Salesforce business analyst, taking in requirements, figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this lead management process? What do we need for lead scoring? How are we going to do our quoting? So it was a lot of the business process that needed to happen. But I was kind of the partner, more than I was driving the requirements. And then eventually over time, I was like, I want to drive the requirements. I want to really, really build this thing out. And so that's what moved me into marketing operations and revenue operations. We had opportunities. We had people either leave the organization or a new team needed to be restructured. And I had all of that great experience being the person who was gathering the requirements, and saw like what worked and what didn't work, and really took the next step to take that to the next level. And so I always say I was 9 years at Code 42. I rebuilt our funnel like 5 different times, 5 different ways. And so it really helped me get a lot of at bats. And now I'm at CS2. I've been here now for 2 years. And I work with some incredible clients. I lead our marketing ops team. So I have 3 direct reports, and we are responsible for kind of all of the fingers to keyboard work that takes place. I do have a couple of clients that I lead as well. So it's nice. I can do the strategic work, and I can work on all of the roadmap projects and helping our clients take it to the next level. But then I can also like get into the weeds and, solve the problems that need to be solved within all the marketing automation technology. So it plays to a lot of strengths that I've gained over the year.
That's great. So with CS2, I want to make sure. So are you both doing internal sort of marketing ops, or as well as client facing stuff, or is it just one of those? Great
question there. We are only external facing.
Okay.
But the way that we are structured, we have client leads that work directly with the clients, building out roadmaps, taking in the strategic requirements, kind of fleshing things out. And then we have a team of MOPS people that we are working with our external customers, but we're the ones that are like fingers to keyboard, getting the stuff done. And so I lead that team.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes sense. I liked how you started this, your point about the things in your life that led you to where you are now, right? I think it's easy for a lot of people to go, I wish I had or had done this or not that, or vice versa, right? And I think, I don't know how long ago it was, but I came to this conclusion, like, I like who I am now and where I am. Are there things that I wish were better or worse? Better, really? Sure. But like it was that combination of all those experiences that led to it, and I think that's a good thing to think about. Getting
100%. The more that you can embrace that, the better. Embrace the experiences that you had, even if it wasn't necessarily like the right path. I feel like, yeah, sure, maybe my early 20s, it would have been great if I could have been immediately in corporate America and immediately doing marketing, and where would I be? But then I wouldn't have had all of the cool experiences that I had that kind of shaped me into the unique individual that I am. My only regret is not paying enough attention to math. I wish I had done a much better job with math growing up.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's interesting. I have just recently been so I graduated from college with an engineering degree, although my friends who are electrical engineers would say I'm a pseudo engineer because it's sort of an offshoot of industrial engineering. Anyway, but that the school had reached out and it was asking me to come back and be a part of an advisory board from from a professional setting as opposed to an academic setting. And we just recently had conversations, and it's really interesting to me to think about that particular education and how I still apply a lot of what I learned to my day-to-day job. And it's kind of interesting because they're asking me to be kind of a voice, especially for those who don't want to go on to do a graduate program to provide feedback and input on how that can apply to helping these people go to either another graduate program that's not in engineering, or to go into a professional career that may or may not have engineering in its background or in its components. So I think there's a lot of value in sort of being open to different ideas and learning from all those things that you get opportunities to do.
Agree. Yeah, 100%.
All right. Now that I've totally taken us off track.
What is the track for this show anyway?
Is
it a show? Is it? I think it's just community building in a micro, like one-on-one or one to a couple people conversation. It's just community building.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
It's a broadcast for building the community.
No, I think one of the things, well, hopefully our audience appreciates these sort of, I guess I call it a sidetrack, but I think it's always for me very interesting and gratifying to hear people's stories about how they got here, because I say this all the time, right? I don't think there is a common pattern yet. And some of that speaks to the lack of this being seen as a discipline where there can be training, although I think that's changing. But I do think it does speak to the diversity of backgrounds that can end up in this kind of world. And I think there's something powerful about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I keep advocating with some of the professional peers that I have outside of marketing operations as I was journeying to build. I mean, Xander, you probably don't know this. I don't know why you would, but we actually like designed an entire like web app, let's call it, right? Where I said, hey, how do we obfuscate like the identity of these individuals in a meaningful manner so that people can come in and like try to find someone with the skills that they need for an open role, right? Like,
yeah.
So a hiring platform of sorts based on, you know, your unique sort of skills and tech stack experience, et cetera. And my aspiration was to dovetail some of the learnings that we come up with from that sort of journey in this community building into basically how do you break into careers? Like I have this whole vision for a product called Career Pather, right? And I would be thrilled if someone went and built it, which is why I'm happy to share it. But basically, like, it's exactly this. Like you, Xander, are saying, hey, I learned these things in this completely different space. But the things, the talents that I picked up are transferable, right? Like I can transfer some of that experience into something else, right? I would make the argument that my wife, who was a industrial sort of like industry property manager for corporate real estate, right? That people management of there's a leak in the roof and the contractors and the vendors and this, like those skills are highly transferable to a whole number of things, right?
Yeah.
You could break into tech and go into customer success. Nobody's going to be pissed off because there's no leaking, you know, roof, but they might be pissed that their leads are leaking. So,
right.
You know? But like, hey, you could figure out how to people manage, right? And deal with conflict and all that stuff. Anyway, so should
we just switch topics to it completely and talk about how hiring process is broken because of things like that, right? Because people don't see it?
I think we could do another show about this, but I at least got us anchored on possibly leads linking and coming back to
there we go.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, so let's honor what we've told in our show description, right? We're going to be talking about ABM. So let's get into that topic. I mean, I'm not even sure if we should still call it ABM.
Yeah, seriously.
But, so Xander, when we talked before, you know, I think we agreed that the way people are quote doing ABM today is really inconsistent, different. There's probably different definitions. I guess especially now that you've probably been through it both in the corporate world and then with clients through CS2, right? Can you elaborate on what you mean? Like, what do we mean by, first off, maybe, I don't know if you want to define what is ABM, but, you know, what are you seeing or what have you experienced in terms of different types of ABM for audience, right? Air quotes are around a lot of this. And with that,
Did you lose Michael as well?
I'm back, I think.
Yeah, just maybe just start back at here. I'll put a little marker here. Start back at for our audience, Hartman.
Okay. Can you elaborate that on that for our audience, Xander?
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of MarketingOps.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At MarketingOps.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you bring up a really good point. Should we even call this ABM? And the answer is no. I don't think that it really values anything by calling it ABM outside of, and I will say this, outside of, we've spent 10 years trying to educate people not in sales and marketing on what ABM is. So you don't want to change it too much. And that's the reason why when we started talking, I'm trying to frame this more as an account-based go-to-market strategy, an account-based go-to-market architecture. Because you are working, this has to be working between both the marketing team and the sales team. And then in an ideal experience, you're carrying this into your customer base. So you're including your customer success teams, you're including your product teams. But let's not go that far for our conversation today. Just like if we can just get marketing and sales to align in the right accounts, we're going to be better off than the majority of organizations that are saying that they're doing ABM. And I think that, where I see a lot of the problems is I bought a tool, so I'm doing ABM, or I hired an ABM manager, so I'm doing ABM. And you're not starting with what is the actual strategy that we are trying to accomplish as a go-to-market team to get the right accounts to become customers. That's what you're trying to do. But we keep on trying to solve it by solving some of like the necessary requirements of a good account-based approach, but we're not starting with what is the true strategy.
Yeah. I just want to say, I think it's my observation now, years into ABM as a topic, is like it's almost like there's these like invisible shadow hand like puppeteers that are trying to like dangle us along on the software solves your problem narrative. Like, you remember when like marketing automation came out and everybody was like, oh, like this will just like leads will just show up. like right. You buy, Marketo or whatever it was, right? It doesn't matter what tool it was. It felt like on the other side was this magic, right? You turn on the switch and like things just flow. And I feel like ABM was like this continuation. Like there's these like secret puppeteers out there trying to like continue this narrative, right? So I feel like ABM tools today sort of accidentally do that, like probably without real intention, right? But yeah. they center around this like complex strategic go-to-market initiative and make it seem like, oh, this is going to make my problems go away. It's just a magic. I turn it on. And the reality is like, if you're building a company, you have to have a strategy and an opinion about how to build the company and the problem you're solving. Well, guess what? It's the same thing, folks. Like if you want to do ABM, you have to have a strategy and a problem that you're trying to solve. And then maybe you should go implement the tool. So anyway, it's just,
well,
it's just
even if you don't believe it's going to solve a problem, I think a lot of people believe that it's going to just start the cash register ringing, right? And
yeah,
I think that's
the worst, right?
Yeah,
I bought this fairly okay, let's call it. It's an expensive tool, right? Yep. I think that we can all agree data is expensive, and so you get into these contracts, and I feel like a lot of those contracts end up sitting as shelfware. Because maybe you had like the one champion who was like, I'm going to use this and I'm going to use it to power my advertising. And then it's going to bring just highly qualified accounts into the system, and we're going to be able to work these as leads, and it's just going to flow. But I don't want to bother the rest of the teams. I don't want to make anybody change the way that they approach their work. I think I can just solve it on the back end. And, you know, the vendors, they can't sell a really complex problem. It's really hard to do that, right? So they have to make it as simple as possible. And then as a result, it kind of turns into, well, I have the tool. Aren't we doing it right? And then you start to figure out, what's the process that you have in place? What are the people that you have in place? What are the things that you're doing and not doing differently because you want to do account-based and it's just not working?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this could easily get into a let's bash all those vendors out there that are selling ABM. And I think that does a little bit of a disservice too. I think some of this, the responsibility for some of these things where you end up with shelfware or not fully utilized platforms, things like that, is because people don't have the strategy in mind about how is this helping us do something different or aligning with our go-to-market strategy. And what, you know, just from my personal experience, I think just about everywhere I've been in the last 10 years, someone has come to me and said, yeah, we want to do ABM. Can we go do ABM? And my response has typically been, well, first off, what do you mean? Right? Do you mean it? Do you want to just go buy software, or do you mean like we want to do a strategy? And I said, if you want to do the strategy, I think the first thing you need to do is, to your point, Xander, like let's go align with the sales team on what are those top X number of accounts and how do we want to go at them? And then usually I'm going like, is there a way we can solve this with, can we do a test run with our existing tools and technology and people, even if it means some manual stuff for the short term? I mean, have you run into similar things? And I'm curious, have you solved, like, generally what's happened for me is you can't even get past the first step of defining the target list. But
yeah. So, you know, thinking about the frameworks that we're building out with clients, that I think is just universally useful, right? You have to start with the right target account list, and you don't need new technology to do so. Like, let's just start with what's in your database. You can start there and even go further than you are today. Or maybe you have a data vendor that's not necessarily a quote unquote ABM vendor, but it's a Zoom Info or a Clearbit or something that they can start to gather some better account data. If it's just the marketing team that's saying, let's go select accounts, or it's just the sales team saying, let's go select accounts, well, there's already a misalignment between those teams.
Totally agree.
So I always say it has to be head of sales, head of marketing. Let's get aligned on what we are going to target, and let's tier out those accounts. Start with your ICP. There's quite a few organizations that still don't really know their ICP, or their ICP has been changing, right? Maybe they started in a certain segment. They're trying to move into a different segment. So that evolves over time. So really get aligned on who your ideal customer profile is and build that as your baseline. But then from an account-based perspective, it's get that baseline and then figure out within that, who are you going to target? You already know that you have a bunch of accounts that are a good fit. Now let's start to target the accounts that are going to give you the biggest revenue potential. Whether it's, you know, it might not be whales for everybody. As soon as you say revenue potential, I think it immediately goes to the giant enterprises, but you might find that your product sells better in the mid-market. Well, let's get the upper end of the mid-market then and start to really prioritize those accounts. You can do all of that work without intent data, without all of the other pieces that end up coming into just a technology solution. That I would venture to say that if you had all of your marketing dollars going toward those targeted accounts that you've selected as a cohesive team, and you know that your sales team is ready to jump on them when they're ready, and you know that the marketing team is providing the right air cover, you're going to have more pipeline from those accounts.
So I'm curious what you think about this too. I mean, you mentioned ICP, which I think that's another term that gets thrown around that has, like, everybody has a different idea of what that means. Kind of like persona, right? So,
yeah.
So let's set that aside. But if, you know, one of the things I think you were hinting at least that I've seen, and I think is becoming more and more important is this idea of buying groups, right? So do you think so I think this is another aspect I think a lot of teams don't really spend a lot of time in, is looking at, what is the profile of the accounts where we win, right? And what does that look like, right? What is, both in terms of like, what are the activities that tend to do that? And what does the buying group look like typically? Like, is it a committee? Do we know who those key decision makers are? Who's the one with the, how important do you think that is to this aspect of really understanding those accounts compared to just, say, demographic, intent signals?
So I think that it's very important, but it's a layer, right? Like if you're not getting the basic profile of the right firms, the right organizations that you're trying to sell into, you could have the right buying teams, but then in accounts that are never actually going to close with you because they don't align. Either they don't have the right technographic data, maybe they don't have the right fit in some other capacity. But as soon as you get those accounts, then you're absolutely right. You need to have the right buyers within those accounts. And it's nothing new. I think that sometimes when I post out to LinkedIn, it's like, oh, there's the concept of the buying committee. Like the concept of the buying committee has been there ever since I started, my career. It's not like this is anything new. Yeah. But it's more defined and it's easier for us to get to that data than it's ever been before, right? With access to data tools and different personas. So really truly identifying, like, not just targeting your decision makers, but trying to figure out what is this whole buying committee going to be. So that way we can surround the teams that are responsible for finding solutions to solve their problems. If you're just targeting specific individuals within an organization, you lose the bigger picture and you lose that overall influence that you're going to have within the organization.
I think what's interesting to me, what's coming through very clear to me, and hopefully for our audience, is that none of what we just talked about is a technology thing. It does require effort, right, for the team to look into this data, to look at historical activity. Like, you've got a lot of first party data, right? In terms of you like dig into your CRM platform and understand that activity if you've got marketing automation, you've probably got activity that's tracked against those. So you could get some really deep insights into what has worked. And then if you can layer in then other parts of your data, but it does, like, it's not just we're going to drop in a piece of technology and it's going to give us all the answers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the technology comes into play. There's plenty of customers that I'm working with right now that have the tech stack to be able to help support it. But, we're not starting those in an ideal state. We're not starting those projects with just how do I optimize this piece of tech. I'm really trying to say exactly what we're talking about here. Like, is our targeting right? Do we have the right people in the database? Do we know who the right people are? And do we have the right messaging to align to those? If you're in an organization that can sell into 15 different industries and you're trying to do an account-based approach, maybe don't start in 15 industries. Maybe it's time to start in 2 and get some messaging toward those accounts. So that way you can really start to capitalize. And now you build a program around it. And now you can bring on another 2 industries. But it's not about blasting everything and saying that this is my total market or even my serviceable market. You have to figure out what is the thing that you're going to be able to accomplish in the next 6 months.
This is I'm giggling because this is almost word for word the conversation that I had with my client who called me specifically about this topic. We have an account-based tool that we're working. Nothing is working. We don't know why. And so we just, and it was very flattering. So I'm gonna try to touch on a couple of things that I think are important for our audience. And I would love to hear your thoughts, Xander. But this conversation that I had with them, I said, first of all, I'm flattered that you came to me to ask about this topic specifically, because traditionally marketing operations professionals aren't necessarily meant to sit there and try to guide your overall go-to-market strategy. They're maybe there to listen in on what is the art of the possible and how do I potentially support the architecture to support that go-to-market hypothesis that you have, but not necessarily are the ones to help you come up with the hypothesis or, these kinds of things, right? Like when you say, is the messaging right? My job as a marketing ops professional is not to tell you if it's right or wrong. It's my job is to give you the tools to decide if it's right or wrong, right? I can implement the structure for you to test the messaging and get the results and tell you what those results were. But my job is to not come up with the messaging for you. And it is not to tell you whether or not I think that is good or bad messaging. That is not my job. My job is to help give you the architecture, right? And so I had this whole conversation with them, exactly that, right? It was like, aim small, miss small. It's one of my favorite quotes. I've said it on the show a number of times. And I definitely stole it from a movie. But I think that's exactly it, right? You come up with, begin with the end in mind, have a hypothesis, understand your products and your services that you sell into the market, your TAM, at a minimum, your TAM. And then from there, who do you think you could sell best into? If you're just getting started and you don't have any data on the other side to go try to, analyze who are our top customers of all time or anything like this, then just come up with a hypothesis, right? And then aim small, miss small, and decide, okay, we believe, let's just articulate it in concrete examples. We believe that industry A with product features A and B combined sold to these three key personas that will yield a pipeline that we can, hit X revenue on. And then you just go see if that works. Right. And so I was flattered to have been a part of the conversation around sort of like strategy and go-to-market principles and these kinds of things, and trying to call out, like, from outsider's perspective looking in. But I wanted to hear, like Hartman too, right? I saw some head nodding for our audience when I was saying, hey, it's not our job to do some of these other things. And so I guess my question really in all of that, Xander, is like, CS2, you got a team around you. You guys are honed in really on operations. I'm sure you have some other practitioners that can help out with some of that messaging strategy stuff. But like, does that resonate with you? Right? I'm going to talk to you guys about these. I'm going to ask you these questions, but I'm not going to sit there and give you the answer afterwards. Right? I'm just going to ask the right questions, hopefully.
I think that that's the key for where you can balance, right? Yeah. Because it is a balancing act. At the end of the day, I always say, marketing ops folks, we are so close to the data, we are so close to the process, we're so close, like we're being leaned on more and more and more and more. When we're doing our jobs well, they want more from us, and we can. I'm not here to criticize your messaging, but I am here to say, do we have the right messaging for this target account? It's your job as content marketers to assess, do we have the right messaging in place? And you need somebody that's in the organization that's thinking about this at a higher level and at a strategic level, and who can just help to drive the right conversations. I'm sitting in conversations with the CEO and the CEOs are going, how do you know that this is the right target accounts? Yeah. So like this, when you're doing this type of a strategic go-to-market change, like it could take you from the marketing ops manager who's just known as like a Marketo database admin into a strategic role, because you're asking the bigger questions and you're really trying to figure out, like, as a collective team, what can we do and where can we go? But you're right. I mean, it's not your job to dictate all of that, but I think that it is your unique opportunity to facilitate that move. And then provide the data to make it happen.
I think my gut reaction to that is, I understand where you're coming from. At the same time, I don't agree that it shouldn't be your job to push back on messaging and things that you feel like might not be core to the ops function. And the reason why is not so much because I think everyone should be good at writing and content and those things. What I do think is important, though, especially for those people who aspire, this is one of the things I think that has restricted or limited the growth opportunities for people who come up through marketing ops, is that they think of this is my domain and they don't think of it as I'm actually I have a unique set of skills that others in the marketing team don't have. I have a breadth of visibility into things that maybe they don't. And I, just like anything else, right, I can learn about how to develop content, how to build personas, like all these things that kind of typically fall into other parts of marketing. So I would be an advocate for saying, if you get that opportunity to be in those conversations, take it. If you have aspirations to go beyond marketing operations and you want to see if you can become someone who could be ultimately leading marketing or leading a revenue function, I think it is incumbent upon you to not just say that's not my job, right? So I think that's the one risk I would put out there that I think is, anyway.
I think no, I appreciate I definitely appreciate that opinion. This will be the second time in 2 weeks that we've had a disagreement on the show between the co-hosts, which is great.
There you go.
But I actually agree with parts of what you're saying. I think the way in which marketing operations professionals have an opportunity to be a part of that conversation is really about, well, first, let me just start by saying, if you see that like your CTA button is like totally wrong compared to what you've done in the past, like speak up and say something. Right? Like,
right.
Let's not be totally like against the idea of like speaking out against bad copy or bad content, right? But I think your unique opportunity to be a part of those conversations is to again go back to the word like facilitate and ask the right questions and say, hey, how do you plan on measuring? First of all, is there a plan on measuring the different types of messaging? And how can I best support which messages work? And how can I create a naming convention or a system for for all of us to easily understand what messages are resonating with the market, right? You don't necessarily have to be a good copywriter, but you do have to have an understanding of what the goal is for the business and how to facilitate measuring that goal. And through that, you're going to learn inevitably which messages are resonating. And because you're paying attention to literally the words on the page, you will eventually be able to turn around and go back to the team and say, hey, guess what, team? You decided to I see there's no test that we're going to run on this next campaign. And you chose this copy based on the data that we've had before. And we've sort of touched on this, in other QBRs. I don't think this is the right message. I'm not going to rewrite this message for you, but I'm just letting you know that according to the systems that we've set up before, the messaging that you're choosing to lead with on this campaign we're about to launch might not be the right one based on what we have. Right. And I think that's a different kind of conversation around copy and content and go-to-market strategy that isn't necessarily you're not signing up to write it.
Yeah. And I think we're more aligned than it may have come across, but I'm like, I hate when I hear things like I don't want people to walk away thinking like there's a limit.
Yeah.
Well, that means that I basically said something that made you think that. No. So it was actually on me.
Well, I think it could be interpreted, right? And that's
it's not your job.
Right. Well, so, but this does bring I want to tie this. Like, so Xander, one of the things that you when you and I were talking about this whole topic early on, it was something about like a lot of these ABM, for, whether it should be called ABM or not. Debatable.
Everybody knows what it is.
Right.
Yeah, so we can say
so in these ABM environments, like that, there's not an appropriate operations kind of resourcing that is associated with it. And I actually, so there's one place where I inherited, in this case, a platform that was a specific platform, but we didn't have anybody resourced to really do what was truly needed to make the most out of it. So, like, do you see that as well, right? What are the downsides of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you are, so let's take. I have a solution that's a account-based solution demand-based, Sixth Sense, Terminus, something like that. Oftentimes, you are relying on the intent data and their methodologies to bubble up accounts that are showing up that they're in market. But that could be thousands of accounts. So if you don't have the right process in place to be able to actually take action on those, they end up going and they end up sitting, or the sales team doesn't understand what data points that they can get out of those solutions. Or you don't have an admin in the solution making sure that the segmentations that you've set up to do all of your automated marketing is still accurate and still aligned. And so it has to have a process in place to understand what happens when I get a qualified account. Right. So let's pretend that we have like any target market or any target account solution. Oftentimes it's just like a checkbox on an account. I'd prefer to have a tiering system where you can really start to see like, here's tier A, B, C. I have different approaches that I'm going to take from a marketing and a sales perspective based upon those tiers. But let's say that we just have target accounts. Like, do we have an approach to mark an account as qualified? And then do we know what the steps are necessary in order to actually take action on those qualified accounts? Because I think one of the biggest struggles from like an SDR, BDR perspective is, okay, great, this account's in market, but who do I target? Who do I message? What do I do? And so, kind of going back to our buying committee, if we don't even know what the buying committee needs to be, how do they know who to find on LinkedIn or in Zoom Info or whatever tools that they have access to really start to prospect against those accounts? And instead, it just becomes, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to go to the accounts that I'm already prospecting into.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, people go towards where the things where they know more or there's less resistance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty standard.
Yeah. I'm just I know we're going to like go into this next piece of the segment here, but I just want to like, toot, like, please folks, if you have these tools, put somebody in charge of managing the sort of architecture of that. I have had one-on-one conversations with the MOPS person that works at a very reputable ABM company who is like, yeah. In fact, I've spoken to the head of customer success at that ABM company, and they're like, yeah, the best possible way to take advantage of the platform is to have somebody who's in charge of actually administering and architecting this product. You cannot buy an ABM solution, just like you should not buy a Marketo without having someone who actually knows how to implement it.
Yes.
So please, if you're investing in this stuff, go hire a consulting team, go hire a contractor or a full-time employee, someone, because you are not going to get what you need out of it. So I heard you say that, but I really wanted to emphasize it because it's been coming up a lot, not just with my client, but in conversations at like Adobe Summit and all these other places. It's coming up a lot right now. So
yeah.
Anyway,
well, I would argue that should go to any piece of technology that you're going to bring into your ecosystem.
But
right, so there
my
needs to be a
eyes were
plan.
opened recently.
There needs to be a plan,
but
yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's different about ABM maybe is that like if you're doing a traditional model where you're doing you kind of mass go to market outbound, and now you're doing an ABM approach, right? There's a new technology that you're bringing in that requires a dedicated, person who understands that, plus how it fits into the rest of the ecosystem and the strategy.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of strategy, Xander, one of the things you shared, and I'd like you to kind of maybe talk through for our audience, is a framework that you have been kind of putting together for how to approach ABM at an organization. So why don't you, if you could share that as much as you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of alluded to some of it. So first things first, when you're thinking about your account-based architecture and approach, start with what are your goals of this overall program, right? It could be to bring in new accounts from a prospect perspective. It could be for your customer base that you want to, reduce attrition. It could be a multitude of solutions. So that is where, your senior team, your CMO and your CRO or whoever it is that you're working with really should be aligned on what's the overall goal, and then start to build out KPIs based upon that. And so what you can do is you can build the framework and kind of the overall architecture to support those KPIs. But if the team's not even thinking about that, like let's start there and really start to figure out like, what does success look like? In terms of, how would I recommend prioritizing and breaking down such a large initiative is into a few key areas. So we talked a lot about the first one, and that is around like selecting your target accounts, selecting your ICP. And you got to start with, I know what accounts that I want to work, and I know what I want to prioritize over the next 6 months. Right. These accounts in general, what we're recommending is it takes a while to actually drum up and generate business and demand within those accounts. So if you're flipping them out every month, which I've seen, I don't know if you guys have seen this as well, but it's like my target account list is updating all the time. It's like, no, really, really be methodical about this and give it some time to be able to have that demand generated. And you can review it, maybe once or twice a year, but definitely something that you need to have, dedicated some resources around.
Sorry to interrupt. Just real quick. So the 6 months, I totally get. Do you think that makes sense if your typical sales cycle is, say, 12 to 18 months or longer? Or does in other words, should there be something that defines that review cycle that's tied to like your deal size and time to close?
Yeah. And maybe what I should say is, I'm not saying that you have to change out your accounts, but it's a good idea to review those accounts, because to your point, you could have 12 to 18 month cycles, but you might be like, you know what, in terms of what I want to prioritize right now, I've gotten enough learnings by working these 100 accounts that I know that these 40, they're going to be more relevant like early next year. So, okay, I'm going to move them out for now, and then I can always bring them back in. But it's not saying that you have to say, well, you didn't win a deal in 6 months, so it's time to drop those target accounts. But definitely something to just like kind of keep in a maintenance mode, but not in a rapid change mode. So you got target account selection kind of taken care of. The next piece is figuring out what your prioritization model should be. So this is where we would start to like think about like, okay, I understand what a qualified lead looks like. What does a qualified account look like? You don't need a third party tool to be able to do that. It's helpful. It's great if you can start to get some of that intent data and some of the on-site web behavior. But I would say that you have enough data from a first party perspective. An MQL doesn't mean that it's a qualified account. You really want to start to think about like, what should my buying team, as we talked about earlier, what should the collective team be doing in order to show that this account is primed and ready to go? Ideally, if you could have a technology, it doesn't have to be a full out ABM solution, but a technology that can help to identify accounts that are coming to your website and write that back. I think that that's a really, really key piece, because you want to make sure that you are at least highlighting the accounts that are engaged with you, even if they're not filling out forms on your website or doing some of those traditional demand generation conversion points. Then what you want to do is you want to activate your sales team. And you want to engage your sales team and your marketing team kind of across a funnel, right? And so funnels serve their purposes. We do a lot of work when it comes to person funnels. I think that it's also useful to understand at an aggregate level, where is this account at? Are they engaged? Do they have, prospects that are engaging with them? Are they qualified? Are they moved into an opportunity? And then ultimately, have they become closed won? You can kind of keep a pretty basic level of an account funnel, but it's just good to know at that macro lens, where is my account moving through? And then you want to analyze the data and understand what's working and what's not working. So that way you can optimize that process over time. So you have account tiers, you have qualified accounts, and then you have a form of account stages that way you can really start to refine, okay, that campaign didn't work. We didn't get enough people moved into the next phase of our funnel that we had as a goal. What can we do differently this time? And so you're constantly trying to iterate and improve. And that's where that team structure comes into play, right? Whether it's the operations person that's making sure that any of the technology that's responsible for this is working. And then also making sure that you have the right, like maybe you need to have your account-based marketer who is really looking at these programs and really trying to figure out what is the creative solutions needed in order to move these accounts along. And then you, of course, have to optimize and kind of repeat that cycle. That's the reason why we bring in that like every 6 months is really figuring out, do we have the right accounts in place? Maybe we did our best and we're just not getting any bites. Okay, let's tap back into our ICP and see if there's other potential.
That's great. I think this is gold. So we'll have to make sure that we tell our listeners when they tap in and we go off that sidetrack that you need to listen all the way through.
Please stay with us.
Stay with us. We have some chaptering stuff happening thanks to AI, which is helpful. So
yay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it feels like we just barely touch the tip of the iceberg here on this topic. I'm sure we could go on longer, and unfortunately, we're kind of up against the clock. So, Xander, thank you so much. If folks want to kind of connect with you, learn more about what you're up to, or where you're sharing some of this stuff in other ways, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so the best way to be able to do that is on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Xander.Broeffle, I think is my URL. I try to post at least a couple of times a week. I provide, information when it comes to account-based. I also love to just provide like really tactical improvements that you can make when it comes to your marketing automation. As I said, I lead the MOPS team over here at CS2. So we learn all kinds of nerdy, cool things. So it gets very much into the weeds, and it's also very strategic stuff that I try to share.
So I think that's great, because I think a lot of people want to get into, like, I know that strategy is important, but like there's often like small tactical things that feel like they're small that can have huge impacts on, say, efficiency and productivity and
100%.
and just like kind of your ability to chill.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a beat.
That's why I wanted to be in the role that I'm in. I'm like, I love being 30,000 feet, but I really like being in the weeds too. So like, kind of find like, okay, I'm comfortable here. Great. Now I'm going to stretch up here. And then the other thing to just mention, I'll float this out here. CS2, we do have a podcast. So I'm a co-host on that.
A really good one.
Yes.
And it's really great content. I listened to it before I was an employee here. And then we're also starting, probably by the time that this is out, we'll actually have some videos out where I'm doing a YouTube series, prioritizing right now some HubSpot work. But again, kind of like really, how do you build out good architecture when it comes to Marketo and HubSpot is going to be my focus.
Nice.
Fantastic.
That's exciting.
Great stuff.
Xander, we're going to see you at Mopsapalooza, right?
God, I would love to. Yes. I'm going to try and figure out how to make it happen.
Let's get you there.
Well, good. Right. Well, Xander, thank you so much. This has been really, first off, it was great to hear another story and great to learn. I picked up new stuff here along the way as well. So appreciate that. I'm sure our audience will be the beneficiaries. And so thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Also to Mike, thanks for being here to support and add your flair to this, right? All your 30 pieces of flair.
Yep.
Little Office Space reference there.
Little Office Space reference. Nice plug. I like it.
Yeah. All right. And then also always thanks to our audience for continuing to support us and give us your feedback and input on guests and ideas. And for those who are interested in being a guest or have suggestions for topics or guests, please let us know. Until next time, bye, everybody.